Hello and welcome to the ReConnect Podcast, a weekly show sponsored by the Anasazi Foundation and powered by Sturry Studios. I'm Gaynalyn Condi, your host. I'm so grateful you've joined us, where we have conversations to help you strengthen your most important relationships and reconnect with those that matter most. Hi, and welcome to the ReConnect Podcast. I'm Gaynalyn Condi, your host. This is a special day because my dear friend and adopted brother, is that how we say it?
Well, that's how you say it.
Yeah, I don't know what he says behind my back, but that's how I introduce him to others. Seth Smith is here today from the land down under?
Arizona, sure.
The hot oven?
Yeah. It's a good time to be here when it's baking down there.
Yes, and it's wonderful to have you here because we communicate via other modalities all the time, but very rarely are we face-to-face breathing the same air and having a conversation. And you are from the offices of?
Anasazi.
See how that full circle happened?
Yeah, the sponsors, the presenters of this podcast.
We are filmed here at the Sturry Studios, and featured guest today is also from the foundation that sponsors this podcast. And so it's going to be a great conversation because Seth and I have a friendship and a connection and a shared why in what we do. And it's been wonderful the last few months to work together on this podcast because it's enabled us to even expand the messages that we both try to share, and coming together is synergistic, and so I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah.
So for those that do not know you, which I don't know who lives on the planet that doesn't know you, because you are a YouTube phenomenon.
I'm not a YouTube. I don't know where phenomenon in all the wrong ways.
Yeah, no. There's some viral messaging about you out there regarding a great message on marriage and more specifically a Mormon message, previously known as a Mormon message. I don't know if we're still calling them that.
Yeah.
Called Sitting on the Bench, and that's a little teaser into your backstory and what our shared why is around suicide prevention. Right. And for those that know my story and know me, I lost a sister 5 years ago, and that's how we met, because I shared an article and it was published, and you found that and contacted me. But interestingly enough, your Mormon message about your suicide attempt had come out during that same time. Yeah. And an interesting story that I remember watching it and being touched and so grateful that there was a message going out about suicide awareness and prevention, but also feeling some triggers from family that called within a few moments of it being released saying, why did Meg not have a different story? So share with our viewers a little bit about your story and how you've come to this place of fighting with many out there to stop this constant rise in suicide.
Right. So I struggled throughout my life, and I still struggle with depression pretty severely. And I think the most intense it had ever been in my life was in my early 20s. And it's just when everything came to a head, and I made a very serious attempt on my life.
What was high school like? If 20s became kind of that peak moment where you were at that really intense crossroads, what was, I think because teenage suicide is on a lot of people's minds right now, were there signs? Did your family kind of see you were struggling, or did you kind of just chalk it up to hormones and high school?
Yeah, there's
hormones in high school.
There's a lot you could chalk up to high school and growing up, and,
right.
But there was also a lot, looking back now, I can see, oh wow, I was dealing with some pretty intense emotions, and I was putting all that blame on myself. Like the thoughts and feelings that I was having, I would internalize and say, well, I caused this. I'm at fault for these feelings. I'm to blame for this, and things aren't going to get any better because this is who I am, and who I am is sort of negative.
So you saw yourself as broken, and then anything that would negatively happen, you would see a cause, or you would attribute to something flawed in you that had created that?
Right, and talking to a therapist, he introduced this really fantastic model for depression of understanding how it works. You know, when you're driving in a car and you see the lights from a police car flare up, your body, before it really has time to process what that image is, you know, with words, it actually has a reaction to it. You get these feelings, the flood of emotion happens before the words come. And so then your body's like, well, now I got to figure out where these feelings are coming from. And so then it starts going through a filing cabinet of all these things that could be wrong. I mean, maybe there's something wrong with your car. Were you speeding? Were you doing this? I can't get a ticket. I can't because of this. It's going to cost. And you start coming up, going through the filing cabinet of all these emotions. And as you go through that filing cabinet of experience, your body starts to have more emotional responses to what you're finding inside of your brain.
So your body and your mind are telling a story about the trigger, and then that feeds off of itself.
It causes more triggers, and it causes this depression spiral.
What a beautiful description. I think in all the hundreds of hours and millions of conversations I've had about it, I don't think I've heard that analogy. And that's such a great example of why it becomes a trap. And so if you're loving someone that's struggling, you're trying to interject, like maybe check the facts on this. You're not really in trouble. You're not really sinking. You're not really destroying the universe. But you're caught in a cycle where you have all this evidence and then a story to back the evidence.
Right. And as you're going through that, all of that evidence, you know, and you start spiraling more and more, you know, the lights of the police car can go right past you. And it takes a long time for that emotion, that adrenaline to sort of cycle out of your body. You know, but when you're dealing with depression, you don't have that kind of external evidence that the danger has passed.
Right.
You know, so you're still feeling this emotional response to maybe some negative thought processes or an experience that you had. You're still dealing with this emotional fallout, and so your body is still searching through all of these negative experiences. They could or could not be true. But you could be going through this filing cabinet of your own experience, and it's saying, you know, well, you're a bad person. The reason you're feeling this, Seth, is because you did this, and this when you were younger, or because you're never going to be worthy, or you're never going to have the future you want because of this, and this.
So then, for example, within the context of high school, then you break up with a girlfriend, or you flunk a test, or you don't make the basketball team, or whatever it is, and it's just more evidence. And you never quite pull out of that lens.
Unless you have some sort of external mirror.
Yeah.
Like some sort of mirror for your brain, right? And that could be a therapist, that could be journaling, that could be
medication.
It could be talking to someone who you respect and love, has a similar background or interest as you, and they've had some experience. So they can come and say, hey, look, I dealt with this when I was younger, and you're going through something similar.
Right.
Let me show you. There is a pathway out.
Right.
You know, they're showing you what's going on in your brain, but most people aren't able to take some sort of objectivity, you know, or what we call mindfulness about what they're going through.
So you could see in your 20s that process, that cycle was starting a little bit in high school.
Now I can see that.
Right.
Yeah.
But then it peaked. And what was kind of just within the context of leading up to the attempt, what were some of the factors that you think were increasing the risk?
Well, there was a lot. I wouldn't get too much into them because, you know, there's failed relationships with people. And then as you're growing up, you're making mistakes. And when you get into a place of depression, you are making a lot more mistakes and stumbling because it's hard to judge how to protect yourself. And so there's a lot of people who got hurt, you know, from the life I was living.
I think as a parent of a young single adult, a 21-year-old, that is navigating the dating, college, career, life decisions, and I think edging into adulthood is a challenging. We've had these conversations with him multiple times. We have literally experienced all those, oh my gosh, why am I dating this person? Or, oh my gosh, I didn't do great. I keep cycling there. I want to change this behavior, but I keep showing up in this way. and we keep trying to reassure him that that's like not some like revolutionary thing wrong with him.
Yeah.
That is, I think, the adult rite of passage that we all have to navigate. But for you in that moment, it reached a peak into a place where, because you had maybe this chronic experience with depression underlining, that you made a decision. And I think this is important to note, because when you and I are asked about suicide and the statistics, I say you talk to a high school group of kids, they're making decisions within a very small window.
Yeah.
And so that's important to note, because if you have a child that is high risk and something is that kind of final trigger, their frontal cortex development is to the place where they may make a pretty serious decision to attempt taking their life within a 15-20 minute window. Some of the statistics show that. That changes, and then all of a sudden the conversation for college age versus middle age, I think, is important. So for you, was it like a slow brewing volcano that was going to erupt, or was it, okay, I'm just exhausted and this is the way out?
Yeah, for me it was exhaustion. It
Okay.
was this feeling. In my early 20s, it was this feeling of a prolonged battle that I was just tired of fighting.
Yeah.
You know, you're just exhausted of the same emotional feeling. Nothing's gonna get better.
Yeah.
Everything's gray.
Yeah.
There's no real color or life to your.
There's no hope.
And there's no future. You're not
Yeah.
seeing that, and that's where it came to. Is just I felt nothing was going to get better.
And did you feel that somehow the world, because I speak on this pretty boldly, did you feel like the world would be better without you, that somehow you were a burden?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I did feel like I was a burden. In fact, that was the, you know, when I'm writing, when I was writing the letters to my family in a journal, and this is what I was just saying was, I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on this family, and the feeling was that everyone would be better without me.
I think that's important to note, because I think oftentimes those that have completed suicide are labeled as selfish, and I often say, in the person's mind, they're likely exhausted, but also they feel like at some level they're not contributing anymore.
Yeah.
And that the world is better without them, which is a lie, but that is the lie of depression. Long-term chronic depression really distorts your contribution, your unique contribution to the world. And I think that's important, because you and I both navigate trying to find those unique contributions every day, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not, I love that you started out the interview by saying, and I still struggle.
Yeah.
You know, I think both of us, in the messaging we do, it's not tied in a bow. Like, okay, this is what happened all these years ago. Then this video came out that explained it, and this was the result, and now I'm just coasting through life, on a trip to Hawaii every day of my life. Yeah.
No. Depression became a lot more manageable for me when I changed how I thought about it. Because in our society, you do want to view, okay, so here's the problem, here's the solution, we're done, we moved past that.
Yeah, check.
But because that never happened, it exacerbated the depression. It actually made the feeling worse that I can't fix this.
Right, which
Therefore,
feeds the feeling of failure in your life.
Yeah.
And exhaustion.
But if I thought, okay, this isn't about fixing depression, it is about a hike. Life is a walking, life is a journey, life is a hike, and there's going to be moments where it's just wonderful, the vista is incredible, the feeling, the sensation of reaching the summit of one peak is amazing, but there's another one on the horizon.
And you've also analogized it being like seasons of our lives. And I think that's such a more hopeful messaging, and I'm so grateful that you just shared that with the listeners, that once you could frame a chronic dance in your life in a new way, then you could come up with steps to do that dance.
Yeah.
And I like to talk about stewardships, and for me, it's been chronic illness or infertility or job loss or whatever that is. And as you frame it in a way that allows you to keep doing the plan B, right, then you can stay in that hope. So before we jump into literally the walk for you, there was an attempt, you planned it, and it was intercepted. And tell us about that.
Yeah. See, it was September of 2006 that I tried to take my life. And I remember I clocked into work. I did a few things, and then I clocked out. I left. My brother Sean was my supervisor. He didn't see me leave. Went back to the house to make the attempt on my life. And I don't want to go into the details of that, but I do know that while my dad was at work, he had this sick feeling. And so he called my brother Sean and said, "Where's Seth?" And Sean
Wow.
was looking for me. He couldn't find me. He talked to my dad. My dad went to the house. He opened up the garage. He saw the car was there, and I was in the car.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't, because of the way that how it was dark and how it was parked, and
He couldn't see you.
couldn't see me. So at first glance, so he went through the whole house and he looked at every level. He said he was looking under the beds
Mm-hmm.
for me, which is unusual. I mean,
Well, and to interject, my brother found my sister at my parents' home, and they were here with me in Utah where we film. And he went to the garage first, and she wasn't there. And so I think you look back on a trauma of any sort, and you go, "Isn't that interesting? The way he went through the house, and where he eventually found her in the backyard." And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting, like, guttural reaction that something's wrong,
Something's
right?
wrong.
And what do you do when you feel, as a family member or loved one, that something is wrong?
and but he found me and took me to the hospital. And I remember waking up a few times, coming in and out. I remember the doctors being very worried that it was too late. I remember seeing my brother Sean, just a visual of him, and he was crying, which was unusual for Sean. I mean,
Because he's not a crier.
No, he's a very stoic, very reserved person, doesn't show any emotion, and I remember seeing that, and that affected me, just seeing that image. And I remember the hospital was agony, and my brother helped me a couple days later. He helped me, come home because my body was pretty numb. So he helped me walk from the car to my room. He laid me down on the bed. It was a large bed, and he
Wouldn't leave you.
he wouldn't leave. He sat down on the bed too, and I fell asleep, and I woke up and I looked over, and he was still there. It was hours later, and he was just sitting there. And I remember telling him, I was like, Sean, you don't have to stay. You can go. I'm fine. I can barely move. I'll be fine. And he said, Seth, I almost lost my little brother, so I'm not gonna go anywhere for a while. And he stayed, and that affected me. I mean, it was that, and there was a few other experiences along the way that I just became aware that there was life outside of me.
And the pain.
Yeah, and there was pain outside of me too. That my life or my absence would hurt people.
I think that's worth a pause, because I think what I hear more consistently than anything when people read something I've written or hear my story or your story, because sometimes our stories intersect and people try to connect us, and I kind of laugh. Yeah, we know each other. That people out there struggling right now need to know the pain that is left when someone you care about leaves. And when you're struggling, you don't even know if you're cared about anymore.
Yeah.
And the reality is, you're just going to have to trust us. Like, if you're in the place that you were describing earlier and you're getting so tired of it never getting better, you're just going to have to trust us that the pain that is left behind is excruciating. And your brother Sean was reflecting back to you, like, you have no concept, because in your soul, your worth had gotten so tiny.
Yeah.
And he was trying to reflect back to you, like, Seth, like, the void of you not being here, the trauma of almost losing you. I think that has been a huge wake-up call. And when I hear from people that have through Meg's story and your story, I know you've heard this too, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know. I couldn't even fathom that me being gone would make my family suffer. And I think we share that not to guilt anyone, but to be an interception right now in your thought process. Because like you said, if you're in this cycle of depression and failure and self-loathing and darkness, right? It's really hard to see and span backwards at all and kind of see that we all leave a footprint on each other's lives.
Yeah.
And how do you measure that? But Sean had this moment where he could reflect back the measurement for just a second, like, no, we have a moment here where we almost lost you, and I can measure what that feels like. And when you heard that, is that when something started to change, or was it a series of awarenesses of your worth?
Well, it was a series. Again, it was, I mean, I saw Sean, and it's important to know that Sean is like a teddy bear dipped in cement. I mean, he's got a soft spot.
It's hard to get to.
It's really hard to get to. So to see something like that is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. Now,
versus me, I can. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I mean,
Very, just the teddy bear. Just the teddy bear.
Yeah.
But that's a big deal. But there was a series of events, a series of people who reached out to me during that time. It was really a tapestry of contributions that helped me see my own worth and value and purpose. But I have to, this is important for me to say.
Okay.
Because I did that Mormon message.
Yeah.
And I feel like, as great as it was, there's one thing that I feel like is really important.
Okay.
And it's that my life didn't get better after my suicide attempt. And I need to emphasize that.
Yeah.
My life didn't get better
Yeah.
because I attempted suicide. And people
now
rallied
who you
around
are.
me.
Yeah.
My life did not get better. It got much
harder,
much worse.
And I hear from that group. That group, the attempt, that group deals with a whole nother layer of shame.
Yes.
And I think that's really important to know, because I think sometimes we tell these stories of surviving, and we don't talk about then the gravel crawling of shame that most, I'm not going to say all, but most attempts, those people have reflected back to me, like there's just this yucky, like, oh my gosh, now, yes, you feel all this love, but you also have to reconcile what you did, and you have to navigate through that shame to
and
come
then
out the other side.
you have your family and your friends who are wonderful, but they're also walking on glass around you.
Yeah, and that feels,
And
it's
you,
like
you
when
feel frail.
Yeah, like when I was going through infertility and people would stop telling me they got pregnant, and all of a sudden it's obvious, and it's like, you want to tell me what's going on here? And I remember saying to a few people, like, I want to have that, so please don't keep that from me. And yes, people were navigating, which is why conversations like this are so important, because it's not just at the ReConnect podcast, we're not just talking about the person struggling, we're talking about the people around that person. And how would you suggest to people that are loving someone that may have already attempted, or they're dealing with suicidal ideation regularly, to interface in a more effective way?
Oh, I mean, I
Come on, you're the expert.
There's no one way.
Right.
You're gonna have to know your friend or know your loved one and how to best navigate that. But I think some of the best things that my parents did was, obviously they expressed their love, and then there was a level with my father. There was a level of hardness, like where he expected things of me. He expected me to move forward.
Yeah.
And I needed that.
Yeah.
And some people on the outside looking in would say, oh, he was being kind of harsh to you. But no, he was doing that from a place of love because he wanted me to succeed.
Yeah.
So I sense that from him.
Oh gosh, it's complicated.
It
is so complicated.
It
I
is.
literally, before we started taping, I messaged that same said college student who I had sent a Marco Polo to that felt it could be interpreted as too pushy luxury, or exactly the message, and I heard nothing from him, and I said, sorry, are you mad? And he's like, Mom, no, it was exactly the message.
Yeah.
But 2 days from now, that could have been like blowing my face. And so I would just say on the outset, we're all doing the best we can, right? And these are complicated issues, and these are complicated feelings, and these are raw emotions. And I think if a child has the gift of a father and a mother, traditionally speaking, I've heard it said, a father can sometimes be the wings, right? Or the branches, and the mother can be the roots or the nest, saying, here's the grounding, right? But a father's the one who's like, no, you can jump into that pool and it's deep, but I'm here, And so
but what I would say is that my life didn't get better because of a suicide attempt. And this is the really important part to say, is that my life got better when I decided I wanted to get better.
Yeah.
Right. And there's things you can control. There's some things I just can't control still.
Yeah.
And I can't control the fact that I have chronic depression. Yeah. I can mitigate that feeling.
Yeah, you have awarenesses and you have tools now.
And I can't control what other people have perceived and what they believe. I can't control their forgiveness of me.
Yeah.
So I get that. But there's a lot of stuff that's within my control. I can see a therapist. I can see a doctor who can prescribe medication.
You can get sleep.
I can
go
get
for
sleep.
a walk.
Yeah, I can do all of these things to make my life better.
And what I'm hearing from you, though, is that the genesis of the turnaround was changing how you saw it in general.
Yeah.
And that depression in and of itself got a reframe.
Yeah.
And when that happened, it opened up the door to possible tools and healing and relationships.
Let me tell you a really good story. So there's this book called The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck.
It's great.
Love that book.
I mean, it's
highly recommend it.
It's like old time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been around.
60s, 70s?
Yeah. My mom and daddy were, and I'm way older. So yeah, I mean, it's a landmark.
Yeah, it's a good book.
It's not just the hot thing on the market.
And in that book, he shares a Greek legend that I love. And it's this story about Orestes who had these things happen to him that were outside of his realm of control. He was punished by the gods because of these things. And then years later, after Orestes had endured this punishment, and the punishment was that the three Furies would visit him and just harp on him and tell him all of these things he had done that were wrong, that he had made all of these mistakes. They would just shout and scream at him. All of these mistakes. These are called the three Furies, right? So years later, the gods get together and say, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we shouldn't have punished Orestes for this. Let's bring him in, and maybe we'll commute his sentence. So they bring in Orestes and they tell him, look, under these situations, maybe we shouldn't have done it. Maybe this is our fault. And Orestes at that point said, no, this is my challenge. This is what I was given, and this is what I will deal with. I will move forward with this.
That's so powerful.
It was when he got this, when he said that
he was free.
The gods, no.
Oh.
The God said, like, we've never met a man like this who would take responsibility like this. And he wasn't freed, but what the gods did is they took the three Furies and they transformed them into the Eumenides. And the Eumenides, they're these three women who, instead of telling him all of the things that he had done, they actually sang music to him.
Wow.
And they would give him inspiration. And so it's this story of when we take responsibility for what we were given,
we transform.
We transform those things into the very things that actually take us to heaven.
Interesting, because obviously I need to reread The Road Less Traveled because it's been a long time. But I've been doing a lot of messaging around the idea of stewardships. And that triggers people because some people assume that means that, there's a God above that is like cursing you with abuse or whatever it is. And in my reflection on what you just shared, it's that if you can see everything in your life as a stewardship assignment, that doesn't place a happy or a sad value on it. Yeah. It's just saying within your care is this car and these bills and the raise and the cute kids and the child that might die. It's all a stewardship. Yeah. And if within my belief system, if that allows me to learn and then become who I am trying to become, which for me ultimately is like the God that I worship, then it's a stewardship assignment, right? So then it's not an ownership problem, right? So then the stewardship assignment God trusted you with was depression. Right. And I have watched you have those Furies transform into the song, right? And it didn't disappear.
No.
But but it is a stewardship that the biblical story of the talents is the perfect example of this. The Lord gives the servants 5, 2, and 1,
Right.
and the one buries it for fear, right? So we put value that the talents were good. It was money, so it was something good. Depression, you wouldn't say, well, I don't want to lose it, I better bury it. But in many ways, you've taken this stewardship and it's expanded into something that, you can then hand over to someone and say, this is what I've taken from this, and I've expanded it in a way that it can be a blessing. One of the ways in which that happened is eventually you found a fabulous organization. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're talking about Anasazi Foundation.
We are.
And this isn't a plug for Anasazi.
No.
It's just because it's my line of work.
Right, and they are the sponsors of this podcast. And when Seth and I started to talk about this podcast, we wanted to make sure it was conducive to the mission of Anasazi.
Right.
But that our listeners didn't feel like we were doing a constant 40-minute commercial about it.
Yeah.
So we invite guests from all walks of life but it's very synergistic, and I think it's really important to know that because of the work, the struggles that you had, it has equipped you in a really beautiful way, this work you're doing now, to provide for your family, right?
Yeah. So the mission, the core mission of Anasazi is to turn hearts homeward. That's the core. That's the basis of everything. Now, what we do is it's a wilderness program. It's kind of like a rehabilitation program in a way. We help a lot of different kinds of youth and young adults who are dealing with lots of different things. And so getting into the minutia of that, it wouldn't be helpful for this program. But when we talk about the core of what we're trying to do, the core is turning hearts homeward, because we've learned over and over again that no matter what young adults or youth are dealing with, or adults
Addiction,
in general,
self-harm, whatever it is,
if we can strengthen their connection to their family, and vice versa, if we can strengthen their family's connection to their child,
then there's the roots, right?
Yeah, then their health, their progress, their ability to succeed in life accelerates.
And it's based on Native American traditions, and it is very much a wilderness walk, and that really is one of the analogies the metaphors you like to use in framing your own journeys through depression and through healing. I think it's important to note that when we strengthen a home, there's no perfect home. Here at the ReConnect Podcast, we're talking about, we bring guests on to talk about addiction and communication and depression and postpartum and all of these subjects, because every family on the planet is dealing with dynamics that are less than ideal, the Furies that you were referencing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And yet, I know in our own family that what has come after Meg's suicide, in the same way, like, my life isn't better without her. Am I very grateful for the mission and the work and the writing and the media and the speaking all over the world and all of that, to take that fury and turn it into a song? For sure. But do I want her back here so we can just go shopping together and share everyday life stuff? Yeah, for sure. So I think it's important to note that we're all in a work in progress within our families. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, well, not in my family, coming home to my family, reconnecting to my family is the last thing that I need. And I'm a fan of boundaries. I talk about them a lot on this show, that maybe within your family dynamic, it isn't healthy to come home, whatever that looks like. But what have you learned through the work of Anasazi that has helped you reconnect back to your home?
Well, so after my suicide attempt, which was September of 2006, it was a year later. I had seen, therapists and counselors, and I really felt like I was in a good place. And so a year later, in September of 2007, is when I started working at Anasazi as a trail walker. And that's really the direct care staff, where you're working with the youth. And
you're out in the field.
You're out there in the wilderness. It's primitive living, and in the middle
no
of...
iPhones.
No iPhones. Well, in 2007, they weren't really...
That's right.
They really
My
went
kids
big.
are like, what?
Yeah.
You didn't have Google?
Yeah,
Nope,
yeah.
we didn't have Google. We had to go to the library.
And you can't
open
even
a
see,
book.
where we're hiking, you can't even see city lights.
Wow.
So it gets dark and it's...
Which is very,
Rare.
very rare and grounding. I mean, if you're, I know for me, when I'm in a state, that's what I call it, and I'm not clear on my internal compass anymore, I have to quiet everything. And that's much harder to do when you're in your house and the computer's still right there and your phones are still there. And so taking kids out of what is their triggered space out in the wilderness.
Mhm.
And so you started as a trail walker,
yeah.
but had not gone through the program as a youth.
No.
Interesting.
No, and that's not unusual, but about 50% of the kids who go through the program years later will come back and work.
Yeah.
And I was out there working, and really it was as I was connecting with these youth and helping them and seeing their struggles and reaching out to them and then learning about them and having them share their experiences with me. That was when the color came back into my
The
life.
lights came on.
Oh yeah, they did, because it's not just recovery. True healing and recovery isn't just about
The self.
the internal. It's about
The
the
giving
external,
back,
like
yeah.
giving back and reaching out to other people.
It's the quintessential cliche of if you won't give it away, you're gonna lose it. But if you give it away, you'll keep it forever. Yeah. And we worked on a book together called The Decision That Changed My Life, and you shared a very specific experience where that connection happened, where you saw what value you could bring to someone else's life. And that was a turning point for you, to see that you intrinsically had something to offer the world. And this program gave you the platform to do that. And I think that's important for, how old were you at this point?
21, 22?
Yeah. And I think that's a crucial age for that. I think being a parent of someone that age, and as I work with that group often, to find that place in the world where you are giving back grounds you to this life, family experience of humanness, right?
Yeah.
It helps you keep you if you're giving it away. So when you realized that you could help turn up the light literally in someone else's life, was that the next layer of healing for you?
Mm-hmm. Once you're able to frame your life in a way that gives it purpose.
Yeah.
Once you find something
Bigger than you to get up for.
to do, something to contribute.
Yeah.
That's when everything changes.
Everything changes.
And I know everyone struggles, like, well, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? It almost always goes back to what got you excited when you were a kid. Like, you can feel it. Like, for me, I loved ideas of writing stories or making movies when I was a kid. I was like, oh, that would be so much fun. And then I figured out, like, well, marketing, there's a way I can reach audiences if I'm working with nonprofits and talking to these influencers and helping them connect and share their messages. And I could see all of these stats of where
and
things
I
are being
could produce a podcast and edit. So when I say my producer's going to get mad, it's this guy right here. And you're really brilliant at it. And you know what's so funny that you just brought this up is I literally wrote in my journal last night before bed, what do I love to do? And because I've been reading and studying about getting out of the expertise level, but into the genius level. And the genius level is that part of your soul. I say it's the 10-year-old girls of the planet. When I was a 10-year-old girl, I played Star Wars action figures. I know you're a Trekkie, but I was playing Star Wars, and I had Barbies, and I was going to be on the Today Show. I was going to do all of that. And so, when I go back to that 10-year-old self, I remember I always wanted to be Oprah. I always wanted to sit and have a conversation and know someone's story.
We're doing it.
We're doing it.
We're doing it, Peter.
Yeah. And I think what's so beautiful is that you have gone on to become an amazing husband, father, and I remember when you became a father, that added even a bigger, more potent layer to this story. And I hear from a lot of people that have attempted and survived, that have come back later and said, no one could have told me in the middle of the darkest moments that any of these miracles were possible. I would not have believed them. There was no way I was going to get married again or have my kids come back or find a career that I loved or go back to college, fill in the gaps. And you had that experience too. Was it with Shannon with having your first, or was it with your son, or was it with both, that you looked at them and thought, oh my gosh, I almost missed this?
Yes, I was with my daughter. I remember I hike the Grand Canyon a lot. Almost once a month.
I think we need to talk about the next career is not marketing, producing, and storytelling. It's building a lodge at the canyon to host all of us middle-aged women that are like, I don't know if I can do it. He's always like, I can take you. I
always wanted. It's either a compliment if I want to go to the Grand Canyon with you. It's either a compliment or I'm trying to kill someone.
Which between you and I and our relationship, depending on the day, it could be any.
So I was hiking the Grand Canyon about a month before my daughter was born, and it was in November, and it was amazing because nobody was there. That's what I love it when it's just
the fall
empty. Yeah, it's beautiful. So I was hiking through it, didn't see a single soul along this path, and it was just perfect. Nobody was bothering me. I could just go at my leisure, and it was getting towards the night as I was going up towards the end of the hike. Right, I'm coming back up the south rim. The supermoon came out. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I remember I was almost at the summit, and I turned and I looked down, and it was startling because I saw way, 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 way down towards the river, I saw these little tiny lights moving on the path. And I realized, these are people with flashlights, right? It's not uncommon that people would hike at night. And I remember thinking, oh, I wasn't alone.
The whole time.
Yeah, and something about that image, like seeing these little lights on the trail, something like came inside of my mind and my heart and said, remember this. This is very important. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what it meant, but I just remembered it was an important visual. And then a month later, my daughter was born. And it's kind of funny because, she's born, my wife holds her first, they put her in the incubator kind of thing for a while so they can measure the weight and put the little tags on her and stuff. And then it's my turn to hold the child. Yeah. And I've never held a child that small before because, they're basically like origami and just so frail. And I remember they said, now you can hold your daughter.
And you were like, ah.
And I said, well, Frances, that was the name of the nurse. I said, Frances.
I love that it was Frances.
Frances, how do I hold her? I didn't know how to pick her up. And Frances said, well, you put one hand underneath her and then another hand underneath her, and then you bring her up to you. You hold her. That's how you hold her. And I went, oh, okay. And I'm over here taking copious notes. Okay,
I love you.
One arm underneath. Okay, was it the left or the right?
Oh.
And so I picked up this tiny little person, right?
She's
7
so
pounds.
Cute.
Lifted her up and held her, and she opened her eyes and looked at me. And I remember seeing inside of her eyes these little lights, right? I didn't know who Shannon was. She hadn't really contributed anything to the world at large, hadn't done a single thing, right? But I remember seeing this infinite worth inside of her, and I was thinking about that Grand Canyon Trail and those people hiking, right? That visual of people hiking along the trail, but the journey of life, about depression, people who are in the darkness by themselves, walking these little lights, moving as best they can along the path. And I remember thinking, I almost missed this. Had I not pressed forward, I wouldn't be holding my daughter, right? And looking at her and seeing this light in her eyes, I realized, well, this is how God
feels. And I think it's important to note that her worth wasn't based on any performance, any grades, helping with chores, looking small, cute, tall, short, whatever, making a certain amount of money. And that's the part that we often lose in this navigating walk through life, right? Yeah. You hit junior high and forget about it. Yeah. And then by the time you're in your 20s and everyone else seems to know exactly the path they're going, you're certain you've been lost forever. I love the idea, though, too, that as you saw the lights behind you, I think one of the most important principles around depression that I try to share with loved ones that are struggling to help support someone that might be dealing with chronic depression and anxiety is that your loved one has become isolated in their mind and heart.
Yeah.
And they have because of what they're fighting, they don't even see the love that you're sending them. And they can't often feel that anyone else is even in the realm of the experience they may be having. That, to me, is where the hope really gets sucked out of someone's soul. Because the isolation, it's about connection. It's about this podcast. It's about shared humanity, right? And it's saying, I may not grow up in Africa in a village, but there is something about your life and my life that connects us as humans. And depression can rob you of that in a really severe way. And so if you're listening to this and you're struggling, just know you're not alone. There are other people on the path. And you are destined to be a trail walker for someone else.
It's true. It's true.
Because you have become that.
And that's what, for me, is probably the strongest affirmation of a creator, is that the natural man, when dealing with something like depression or suicidal feelings, the natural man will disconnect
From
everybody and say, I'm a wounded person,
Yes.
a broken person. I am not worthy of being around you. I'm a burden to other people. I'm going to protect you.
Because you start to
disconnecting.
think you're going to get your depression on other people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you do.
And the creator will come in and say, no, if you want to heal, I need you to love your neighbor, love me, connect with those sources.
Yeah.
Because that's going to heal you.
Yeah.
And that's what and that for me is just the biggest affirmation that there is someone out there
Bigger than us.
looking out for
Yeah.
us.
Disclaimer, please don't send hate mail to my producer about our faith conversation, because we do disclose that you may not define a creator or higher power as God, and that's okay. There's room for agnostics and atheists on this podcast. But for us, that's the lens by which we see the world. And I think it's important to know that one of the big whys for me, and why people are always like, oh, you're kind of a Jesus freak, you're always talking about God. I don't know another way, because I think we have to span back far enough to see something is got to be bigger than me.
Yeah.
Because if it's just about me, then that's a disaster. But if there's someone bigger than me, something bigger than me, asking something of me, I can show up for that. And in doing that, I find myself again every time, right? But yes, the natural tendency is to close in. I can say out loud, though, that it is important to have alone time. You and I value that. And as much as we're out there, you hike the Grand Canyon, and I do meditation, shut everything off, and journal. And I think that's important too, because that connects me back to my source, right?
It's a disconnect to reconnect.
It's a disconnect to reconnect.
You disconnect from the stressors of the world in order to connect with the sources that are most important to you.
Yeah.
And that, even on that Grand Canyon hike or any of the hikes I do, I'm disconnecting from the cell service and all of those things so that I can really think about the creator, and I can think about my relationships with my family.
And the long view.
And things that are really important.
Way more important. And if you go to a funeral, you get that a real clarity check all the time, right?
Yeah.
There's some of the most sacred gatherings I've been to, because it makes you pause and go, really, what's on my to-do list and what is bothering me and what I'm worried about? At the end of the day, if this was my last day, what did I bring to the planet? Thank you, Seth, for fighting and pressing forward. I think the word pressing forward is important, because it's
actually two words.
Well,
Pressing forward.
the pressing part. Oh my gosh.
That's just the producer and me.
Do you see what we...
Yeah, what we
Yeah,
deal with,
this is the behind the scenes. The pressing forward.
Important two words.
If you hyphenate it, it's one, and a hyphenated name that I
wouldn't
have.
hyphenate it. I would have it as two words.
I'll tell my mom you're not a fan of the hyphen.
Okay.
That there is an oppositional force there. It's not a stroll, right? It's a press, and pressing forward is often difficult. I love how often you just said connect. I think you said connect and reconnect and connect, because at the ReConnect podcast,
I'm branding. Yeah.
we're very much about connection, and there's some rough seasons for all of us, and I think maintaining connection in any way. I love the podcasting format, because I have found that those that may be in that isolated state, that think they're in the bottom of a canyon and no one even knows that they're there, will put in an earbud and push play on a podcast and hear hopefully a voice that reminds you of your worth, as baby Shannon taught us. And as Seth has done from that moment forward, I can stand as a witness of the good that you have continued to bring to the world and continue to share with vulnerability and honesty in a way that I know it's not easy. I think both you and I some days are like, really? We're going to keep messaging about suicide? Yeah. There's times in our lives where we both have to say to each other, we get weary, because especially from March to May, I get a lot of phone calls, and I think this last year we both had a lot of that. And it can feel discouraging, like, is anything getting better? So then I go back to the one, and I'm grateful for your work. I'm grateful for our connection. I'm grateful that God, that day when I watched that video and I fell to my knees in prayer, and I was frustrated and angry that I hadn't been the big sister like Sean had. And that I hadn't gotten there in time. I remember God saying to me very clearly, the message isn't done. There's more to come. And if I had known that it would be this dear friendship, God's pretty cool. He always has a better plan. And I had no idea that we would be able to collaborate on a number of fronts and have a friendship that is forever for me. You're stuck, is what I'm trying to warn you. Sean has been the brother to you, and Meg has, gone somewhere else. And yet I always feel her here, and she's grateful that.
Well, I read the article you wrote about Meg.
Yeah.
And I was in Africa, and I felt like I should reach out to you.
I know, and I remember that day, and I was like, what? God, this is how it's gonna.
Well, in the time since then, I felt like that was Meg.
Yeah.
Telling me to reach out to you.
Yeah. And she's done that a number of times, and I think that's important. In my faith system, I know she's aware, and her stewardship now is to watch over. And that's a really frustrating state for those that have passed on, that completed a suicide. I have a friend that's a therapist that will boldly say to her clients that are ready to be done, and she will get in their face and say, okay, fine, but tomorrow when you wake up with God, you will not have your therapist with you. And we have to do some suicide humor, because it's a pretty heavy subject. And so I'm grateful that Meg has made sure that that I have had you in my life. And thank you for the work that you've done and for making this podcast. Honestly, let's just be full disclosure here. There would be no me at the ReConnect Podcast without Seth. So he is staying true to his why and his love of storytelling and producing. And we keep praying and hoping that it's doing good in the world. It trickles out. And thank you for having the courage to share your heart. And man, I don't think I've cried that much on the ReConnect Podcast. You got all the tears I've been saving.
I have to really edit that pretty hard.
No editing. No editing. I love you, brother. I love you, brother. Thank you for joining us here at the ReConnect Podcast. I hope that you will join us again, and that whatever platform you have found us on, that you will share this message, especially today, with someone that you love, that it will find its way into the earbuds of those that might be in the bottom of their canyon, that they will see the light and be able to journey back up. Thank you, Sturry and Anasazi Foundation, for making it happen today, and we'll see you again on the ReConnect Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the ReConnect Podcast, presented by Anasazi Foundation. Are you worried about your teenager? Are they struggling with depression, low self-esteem, anger, drugs, or suicidal thoughts and feelings? If so, Anasazi Foundation can help. Anasazi is a wilderness therapy program for at-risk youth, and our mission is to help turn hearts homeward. To learn more about us, please visit anasazi.org. If you liked this show, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Thank you again.